A horrific shooting in Nashville leaves 3 little kids and 3 adults dead. The victims were students and teachers at a Christian school. The shooter was a 28-year-old woman who identified as a transgender man. We don't know much about the shooter's motives, but that has not stopped people, particularly liberals, from reading from their perennial script to blame guns and the Second Amendment for the evil actions of criminals. More information is coming to light by the hour, and we will get into a lot of it today. But even if we didn't know anything at all about this shooter, we would know that the fault could not lie with the Second Amendment and guns which have been around for about 1,000 years. Guns have become more lethal since the 11th century when they were invented. There's no question about that. But guns actually have not become all that much more lethal. They have not changed all that much over the past century. Machine guns were invented in the 1880s. The Tommy gun was invented in 1918. Those guns are much deadlier than anything ordinary civilians can get their hands on today. No, over the past 100 years, guns have not changed much at all. Our conceptions of mental health, on the other hand, and spiritual reality, and political institutions have all transformed almost beyond recognition. But very few people in power are willing to admit that. It's much easier to point fingers implausibly at the NRA or whatever. Much easier and much more dangerous. Our reckless and negligent rulers get off the hook. The root causes of our social rot remain unaddressed, and we all just wait for the next predictable tragedy. What do we know about this shooting? The police chief came out yesterday, some hours after the shooting, which is right here. I mean, the Daily Wire is in Nashville. Nashville's not a very big town. And so obviously we were tracking this very, very closely here. Here's what the police chief had to say.
Our investigations tell us that she was a former student at the school. I don't know what grade she's attended or grades, but we do firmly believe she was a student there.
Did she identify as transgender?
She does identify as transgender, yes.
And no motive at this point? Anything discovered in the apartment or house?
No, we have a manifesto. We have some writings that we're going over that pertain to this day, the actual incident. We have a map drawn out of how this was all going to take place. There's right now a theory of that we may be able to talk about later, but it's not confirmed. And so we'll put that out as soon as we can.
Hey, Chief, is there any reason to believe that how she identifies with white?
I'm sorry, I knocked someone's mic over. I didn't hear you. Say that again, sir.
Is there any reason to believe that how she identifies has any motive for targeting the school?
We can give you that at a later time. There is some theory to that. We're investigating all the leads, and once we know exactly, we'll let you know.
So there you have it. You never want to jump to conclusions in any of these tragedies. There's so many people, especially the libs, but everybody feels some impulse to react to any tragic political event and impose their political vision on it. So the libs always do this with the guns, totally implausibly. And but the conservatives here, when they heard that it was a woman, or was it a man, or it was this name, or it was that name. Daily Wire has a rule generally, which is we don't name shooters in these situations because we don't want to give them glory and we don't want to encourage others. There is an exception to that rule in this case because the name and the way that naming works is actually a central part of this story. When the news first broke, we were told it was a young woman. Then we were told it was a young man. Then we were told that it was a person named Audrey. Then we were told it was a person named Aiden. And it became clear very, very quickly that this is a transgender identifying person. So what does a transgender identifying person mean? Does that mean a man who's pretending to be a woman? Does that mean a woman pretending to be a man? Does that mean a woman who's pumped full of testosterone? Does that mean a woman who just says that she's? We just didn't know. It's now become clear that obviously this person had lots of identity problems, and the police chief is saying yes, One of the theories here that we're pursuing that seems quite plausible, if not likely, is that transgender identity was a motivating factor here. So the police chief then goes on for what we know. We know that this was targeted at this Christian school. We know that this person attended the Christian school, but must have attended that Christian school like 20 years ago. She's 28 years old. What else do we know?
So was this a targeted attack?
It was.
Do we know about a history of mental illness? Man or woman?
Don't know any history of mental illness at this time, but
Put a
we
pause
are
right
looking
there.
at that.
We're not allowed to say anything on YouTube anymore. Let's just recount what the police chief said. The police chief said, this is a woman who thinks that she's a man, followed by, we have no evidence of mental illness at this time. Not quite sure how to make sense of those two statements next to one another. Keep going.
The investigation is ongoing, and I'm sorry.
She identifies as a transgender man or woman?
It's a woman.
Was this the only school that was targeted?
Put a pause there. I assume the police chief, just being a normal person, just misspoke here because this issue is so preposterous. But the question was, is this a transgender man or a transgender woman? And what's confusing about this statement is if you're a transgender man, that means you're really a woman. And if you're a transgender woman, that means you're really a man. So he answered and he said, this person identifies as a transgender woman, which would mean that she's really a man. But it would appear from all the available evidence, no, she's really a woman who identified as a man. Keep going.
It was the only school that was targeted. There was another location that was mentioned, but because of a threat assessment by the suspect, too much security, they decided not to. And that area was here in Nashville, so we're continuing with that investigation as well.
So this last part, not surprising at all. These would-be shooters always look for soft targets. So if there's a location where people are armed, where there's a reasonable expectation that people might be armed, where there's professional security, you're just not going to look at those places if you're attempting to commit one of these atrocities. So there was another location, there's a manifesto. We don't have any of that yet. We'll stay tuned. What are the common threads here? People are saying this is so unusual because the shooters are usually these lonely white guys, school shooters. And it's a little more complicated than that if you include gang-related school shootings, but there are common threads here. And I never really thought the common threads are it's white people, or it's boys, or it's this, or it's that. What are the common threads? History of mental illness. Common threads are social isolation. Common threads are psychiatric drugs in many cases. Not in all cases, obviously, but in many cases. The common threads are broken families. We don't know anything about this woman's family now. Maybe this woman's family is totally fine. We just don't know. And this happens again and again and again. This happened not that long ago. A Colorado, also transgender identifying teenager, shot up a Denver area charter school pretty recently, left one student dead and 8 others wounded. And the curious timing of this attack is that it coincides within a few days of a planned national event called the Trans Day of Vengeance. According to a national group contacted at Our Rights DC, April 1st will be the Trans Day of Vengeance to stop the trans genocide, allegedly. What is the trans genocide? A hallucination of people who don't have a very good grip on reality. What is the trans genocide, quote unquote? The trans genocide is a fable made up by disturbed people to justify violence against conservatives and Christians and normal people who understand that men and women are different and don't think that we should let men enter into the women's locker room and strip down naked. So the Trans Day of Vengeance is supposed to take place in Washington, D.C., though some of the people who are supporting this have suggested that the Trans Day of Vengeance take place outside of Daily Wire headquarters, take place in Nashville. The group is run not just by completely fringe lunatics, Well, they might also be fringe lunatics, but some of them have had mainstream jobs. The group is run in part by a former Democrat staffer, Bo Bellotti, the trans national recruitment director. He's a former staffer for Virginia Democrats. They've raised money specifically for firearms training. They've called for direct action in Nashville. Trans Day of Vengeance. Not the Trans Day of Justice. Not the Day of Justice for everybody. Justice is when you give to people that which they deserve. Vengeance is not that. Vengeance is when you personally take retribution for a personal slight, perceived or otherwise. And it reminds me of an old proverb that people variously attribute to all sorts of thinkers, and no one really seems to know where the proverb comes from, but it's a good one. That is, when you set out for vengeance, dig 2 graves. Dig 2 graves. Dig a grave for the person you want to get vengeance on, and dig a grave for yourself, because that's how it's going to turn out. Certainly how it turned out yesterday. It's how it always turns out, though, in the long run. Because either the quest for vengeance to get retribution for a slight, real or perceived, will either result in you being killed or being jailed, or it will result in the destruction of your soul, because vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So do not take vengeance. This is from Deuteronomy. This is from letter of St. Paul. Do not take vengeance. We want to take vengeance all the time. And we can't do that. We can't do that because it's very bad for our souls. It's very bad for society. We have a civil authority to exact justice. And people feel really justified in their own personal vengeance. And they feel really angry. Jeffrey Marsh, who is this transgender identifying social media person who speaks directly to children and asks little children to message him so they can talk about sex together. Jeffrey Marsh said that transgender identifying people should be really angry, channel that anger. Everybody should be really angry. You only hear this from disturbed people, generally on the left. If you are channeling your anger, not your sense of justice, not your political action to transform the civil authority, to enact justice in a more perfect way. But if you're saying we're going to go out there, we're going to get vengeance, you're almost certainly on the wrong side of things. It's a line from my friend Andrew Clavin, who says that anger is the devil's cocaine. And it is. And it is. And what do we know about all of this? We don't know the specific drugs that this person may or may not have been on. We don't know the psychiatric help that this person may or may not, almost certainly did not receive. We do not know the nature of the person's family or community or hatred of Christianity, perhaps, if it's targeting a Christian school. We don't know any of that. We do know that this stuff is demonic. We do know that because we strive against not flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. And when ideas pervade the culture that convince you to deny reality and to pursue fantasy, and the deeper that you pursue fantasy, the more angry you should become. And you will become, because when we live according to lies, we become very frustrated because the reality doesn't match up with what's in our minds. That is demonic. That's all that is. We will be moving into the member block, the Nostradamus Membrum Segmentum. We will be examining some movies that Mr. Davies insists that I check out. The rest of the show continues now. You don't want to miss it. Become a member. Use code Knowles, Knowles, at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans.